Hello and welcome to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. In this regular podcast series, we'll delve into the world of cloud, answering some of those tricky questions, getting to grips with all that cloud has to offer, and keeping you up to speed on recent developments. So let's begin, shall we?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Series 3 of Cloud Speed by Deloitte. I'm Adam Goatee, a director in our cloud engineering practice here at Deloitte, and I'll be your host for this episode of Cloud Speed. What a year it has been. We launched this podcast 1 year ago, and so much has happened since then. Over the last two series, we've touched on topics of cloud fluency and brought you some inspirational use cases of cloud, demonstrating how cloud can help solve business problems and drive innovation and transformation across enterprises. We would really like to thank everyone who has contributed towards our journey in any way, our esteemed guests, and most importantly, you, our listeners. We're really excited by the lineup of topics for Series 3, from sustainability to cloud risk and consumer adoption. If there's something you would want to hear about, or you've got a burning question around cloud, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. With the rapid growth of cloud computing, and therefore increasing the number of data centers and electricity demand, there is a need for cloud to become green as their contribution to global warming rises. The largest cloud service providers have pledged to cut their carbon emissions, signing up to initiatives such as RE100, which is an acronym for Renewable 100%, in which its members must publicise annual progress reports in their quest to achieve 100% renewable energy. So what practices has the market adopted to achieve sustainability? To provide you with our thoughts on this topic, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Ben Coombs, a director in our net zero transformation team. Ben, why don't you kick us off by introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'm Ben Coombs. I'm an economist who has been working on climate change for 15 years for the UK government, investment managers, international organisations and global corporations. The past 5 or so of those years have predominantly been spent looking at how we can harness technology for people on our planet with a particular focus on climate change.
Thanks, Ben. I'm delighted to have you on this episode to talk through such a relevant topic. So Ben, I guess what exactly is the connection between cloud and sustainability from your perspective?
Well, I would say we've got sort of 3 main areas. I think you've touched on the first one, which is the most obvious one, which I think most of our listeners will be aware of, is the big cloud providers, the big data center providers committing to sort of 100% renewable energy or on a trajectory towards 100% renewable energy. So I'd call that the sort of number one is kind of the green cloud. The cloud in and of itself, the infrastructure, making sure that it's powered by 100% renewable energy. But I think that's also extending now to include, the water use of the data centers, waste, and the impact on broader biodiversity. I mean, it's no good, cutting down a rainforest to put a data center in and then saying it's powered by 100% renewable energy. It needs to be the impact, the total environmental impact and social impact that data center or cloud provider is having. So I think what we're going to see there is that extending. The second area is sustainable cloud tools, which are sort of modules, tools to help companies measure and manage their greenhouse gas and carbon emissions profiles and impacts. So we're starting to see lots of the providers with calculators and tools to help companies, organizations measure and manage their own carbon footprint with these tools hosted in the cloud. And with interoperability with EPM and ERP systems increasingly at the vanguard of that. And then the third area, which I think is really exciting and is really only sort of very nascent, is the idea of sort of climate tech solutions. How can we use the power, the scale of the cloud to really drive and scale emerging tech like AI, blockchain, IoT to power new climate solutions? From discovering new ways of doing things to tracking and tracing existing activities and transactions to optimizing existing systems or helping, realize decentralized systems in the case of things like energy, and people are even talking about decentralized water as well.
And so I guess I'm increasingly finding that sustainability as a topic is coming up in the cloud strategies that I support my clients to develop, often I guess around reducing carbon emissions, so perhaps what you've termed as green cloud. what from your perspective, what exactly is driving organisations to put this topic high up on their agenda?
Well, if we start at the sort of boardroom or C-suite, many companies are setting those net zero ambitions right from the top. We've seen, a swathe since the IPCC 1.5 degree report in 2018. I think that really drove the agenda to say, look, we do need to get to net zero, and those ambitions have been put in place. That's been the past 18 months to 2 years. People have been sort of setting those ambitions, thinking about those roadmaps and trajectories to net zero. But there's a realization we need rapidly to turn those ambitions into actions. And the first step for most organizations is to establish that baseline, to understand their existing emissions, and then work out that pathway. So, there's a need for companies who realize that some of their emissions are coming from their purchased electricity, and obviously a lot of that can be through their cloud providers, depending on whether it's in scope 1 or scope 2, whether it's in their own operations or within purchased electricity. So the first step is to measure those existing emissions. And for tech-focused companies, significant emissions can be found in those data centers and the associated value chains. And therefore, if we've got tools to measure, that can be really helpful, particularly if they're interoperable with the existing systems that companies use, particularly EPM and ERP systems, which are increasingly moving to the cloud. So therefore, companies can really understand in real time what the emissions effects are having.
And I guess for those organisations that are actually beginning to execute on their sustainability strategy, what are the challenges and opportunities that you see them facing?
It's a really complex area. I think that's probably the first thing to say, particularly when we get involved in even the measurement is a challenge. And for scope 3, which extends to the full value chain, there's a real need for collaboration and partnerships to work with others. And we've seen a lot of collaborations and partnerships spring up over the past 18 months for that very reason. And I think trust and transparency are key if you're working with partners to make sure that happens. There's a huge opportunity to make more informed choices about the better management of emissions and climate change, climate action more broadly. I think that's the first thing to say. There's, we are not operating in an optimal way. And we're, eventually, I think we're all hoping for a sort of boards and senior leaders, function leaders to have a sort of real-time dashboard to manage and drive faster change. So not only to measure their emissions, but to say, if you put these solutions in place, they will drive this type of reduction. And the good news is, because often we're talking about energy, there can be, obviously a lot of associated cost savings attached in terms of driving that efficiency. So there's a chance overall to really accelerate climate tech solutions as well, providing a broad range across sectors and geographies. And that's why cloud is so important in terms of giving us that global scale and being able to operate things quickly and to get the compute power through as well. And that hopefully we can tackle the climate crisis that much more rapidly. And that was one of the reasons I got into technology five or 6 years ago, was because I saw the opportunity to really accelerate change.
I guess a lot for organisations to think about. So how are they getting on, and I guess importantly, what are we doing to help them?
I think, as you mentioned at the top, I think there's been a lot of progress on green cloud from a renewable energy perspective. Many providers are at or nearing 100% of their data centers being renewable energy powered. That's changing to also be not just over 365, saying you're renewable over 365 days, but also saying matching 24/7. Like, does each hour of energy use actually match with generation elsewhere? So that's the next phase for sort of renewable energy side. And those broader issues, water, waste, biodiversity, are only just starting to be on people's agendas, I think. But I think that those will be rising issues. I mean, companies all over the world are now grappling with the tools they need, not only to measure, but to manage their emissions in a dynamic and real-time way. And they're starting to think about how they can make informed decisions on their own and with their alliances and partners. So, one of the things we're doing to help is to start thinking about how can we, we've got some of our own tools within Deloitte. We're co-developing tools with people, and we're using other tools and bringing those tools to our clients where they've been developed by third parties or some of the providers themselves. So I think it really is a case of getting the right solution for the right sector, for the right market. And sometimes that can be quite a niche, small solution, or it can be a global scaled solution. And I think it's finding that right solution and making sure that works. On the climate tech side, those solutions are developing rapidly at a startup level. I think we've seen a huge move, that in climate tech. There's been quite a lot of coverage in the press recently about that. And the next question for me is whether those solutions can be scaled and interoperable with existing cloud infrastructure, because I think that's the next stage of that, which is, it's important that climate is no longer a bolt-on. We need to make sure that when we're doing this measurement management, looking at solutions, some of these, climate tech solutions that are coming through, to make sure that they're truly global in scale and can have that global impact, because we need it. It's not just we want it, we actually need it to drive the change that we need to see this decade.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I guess the startup space is particularly interesting, isn't it? Because I guess I'd observe that hyperscalers are often either expanding the range of services organically or through acquisition to kind of expand their set of services to address some of the things that those startups are offering. So from your perspective, where are the hyperscalers focusing their efforts?
Well, I think they're doing a number of things to respond to that. I think that they're looking across these three areas and they're wondering where and how to play, I think is the honest answer. So, and some are taking different approaches. Do you partner? Do you invest? Do you build yourselves? I think it's a question that each of them are answering on their own, depending on where they see their efforts. I mean, many are definitely getting on top of that renewable energy question. I think that goes kind of, we mentioned that a couple of times. And as I mentioned, I think that's moving to the sort of 24/7 metric rather than balancing emissions over a 365-day time period, where you can use more offsets and different types of certificates. So that's tightening. A number of developing those tools to tackle the measurement and management questions. Although I would say at the moment, and I think all of them would probably agree with this to a certain extent, that the functionality is not where they want it to be. I think we're going to see a huge change in that functionality in the next few years, and even by the end of this year, I think we're going to start to see some bigger, solutions on the horizon, because I do think a lot of them see this as a gateway to the cloud of the 2020s, and many see the promise of climate tech and are developing their strategies around that. And as I mentioned, that's not always easy to work out, whether it's invest, buy, partner, whatever suits, depending on the solution.
No, completely makes sense. And I guess we're seeing more and more kind of industry specific offerings from the hyperscalers. So I guess, do you see any particular trends in cloud and sustainability across different industries and different sectors?
Energy has typically been ahead of the curve, and energy transition has been a term widely used for a decade now. What's different with net zero, I think, is we're talking about a different pace and scale of change. Hence why we use that term net zero transformation. And I think transformation is key here rather than transition. And many of the cloud alliances and partnerships announced in the past 6 to 9 months have been in the energy sector. Transport's not that far behind, as mobility is such a big contributor to climate change, and logistics is particularly well suited to cloud solutions in terms of optimization and efficiency. If we think about shipping or aviation or a lot of the global supply chains, heavy freight, that they're particularly well suited to these types of things. And now I think the big trend we're starting to see is to consumer and retail, as people desire goods and services that are climate compatible. So companies are starting to think about climate compatible design in all of their product offerings, and being able to show that to their consumers that they're on that trajectory to net zero in terms of what they're producing and what people are purchasing.
I couldn't agree more. I guess from a personal perspective, I'm certainly seeing, my day-to-day decisions are being informed, I suppose, around the impact that I'm having on the environment. So I guess from your perspective, what's next in cloud and sustainability?
I think we're going to see a confluence of those three areas that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast around green cloud, the sustainable tools, the climate tech solutions. And I think we're going to increasingly see an integrated modular framework. I don't think we're going to see, one solution that covers absolutely everything from any of these providers, but I think we're going to have a modular integrated framework that companies can develop and deploy at their own pace and scale, specific to their industry needs and their geographic locations and their setup. So overall, I think climate and cloud is likely to be a pervasive trend in the 2020s, and I suppose that my main take home for listeners out there is that 100% renewable electricity, however well defined and increasingly better delivered, which I think it will be over the coming decade, that's only going to take us so far. That's not the end of the story. That's the end of phase one of the story. The cloud has a lot more to offer than that, and really needs to be one of the key focal points of how we're driving solutions with technology, how we can really use AI, blockchain to really transform. We've got a big non-linear problem in climate change, and we need exponential solutions.
I'm certainly really excited to see how the space develops. It's incredibly important. I know we can go on about the topic, but unfortunately that's all we've got time for today, listeners. So a big thank you to Ben for joining us on this episode.
Thanks very much, Adam. It's been a pleasure to join you, and I hope this talk has illuminated why Cloud for Climate is a topic to watch closely and increasingly get involved with in your own organizations over the coming months and years. We really need to scale solutions so quickly, and cloud offers us a big opportunity to do that. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Ben_Coombs at Twitter, and I'm Benjamin Coombs on LinkedIn. Please do get in touch if you'd like to discuss further how we can use cloud to help with net zero transformation.
So before we close off, we've got a round of cloud updates, and this week coming from Sundar Ramaswamy, our Google Cloud Solution Architect from Deloitte. Over to you, Sundar.
Thanks, Adam, for having me here. Can't think of a better topic than sustainability to kick off the new podcast series. As more and more IT leaders these days are choosing a sustainable future, and as the world returns back to work, it is really more important than ever before for businesses to adjust to the new reality. They need to start making decisions that will ensure the containing sustainability of our planet. From a Google Cloud standpoint, there is a renewed push for sustainability, especially around how solar and wind energy can be purchased to match 100% of the electricity consumption, and that is what I would like to touch upon. When it comes to running collaboration tools, infrastructure, and applications on Google Cloud, there are a few sustainability aspects that come into play. The first one is around using less energy. So Google Cloud data centers use 50% less energy than the industry average, and they are equally twice as efficient. Compared to 5 years ago, they deliver 7 times the compute power for the same amount of electricity. Google Cloud also focuses on net zero emissions and provides a number of ways to squeeze more computing out of the electricity that is used. A lot of this is driven by inbuilt artificial intelligence expertise to operate the cooling systems in data centers. Workloads on Google Cloud have net zero operational carbon emissions. This is done by matching all the electricity used with renewable energy. In fact, by 2030, Google Cloud aims to run on 24/7 carbon-free energy at all data centers around the clock. I feel all IT leaders need to slowly start thinking about how carbon emission can be incorporated into IT decisions. There needs to be a mechanism to evaluate a net carbon neutral option, which means the electricity consumed by data centers should be matched by renewable energy. There needs to be third-party certification for carbon accounting, and all the hyperscalers should be able to provide an estimate of the net carbon emission impact from migration. Google Cloud does provide all of these capabilities and also allows to sort regions based on their carbon-free energy consumption. So as an example, say choosing Finland region over Frankfurt will reduce the price for standard instances by 15%, and it will end up increasing the carbon-free energy by 16%, which is a substantial rise. Customers, in fact, will have the ability to pick a lower carbon region for their applications or bad jobs for that matter. And there are also organizational policies provided to restrict the location of resources to lower carbon regions. So, all in all, as more organizations are realizing the benefits of digital transformation and cloud migration, it is equally important to consider the sustainability aspect too while evaluating cloud providers, and Google Cloud has all the necessary tools in place to support a green future. Thanks again for having me, Adam. It's always a pleasure. Back over to you.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening. If you have, please make sure to share it with someone who you think will enjoy it too. Please do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn at Adam Gogarty, or if you'd like to find out more about Deloitte's cloud capabilities, please visit deloitte.co.uk/cloud. In the meantime, I'm Adam Gogarty, and you've been listening to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. Thanks for tuning in.